Okay, hello everyone. My name's Ian. I'm a PhD student here at the University of Kentucky in philosophy and a longtime activist. Before I get into this presentation, I want to offer two caveats. One is that this was very much built out of our slideshow, so there's going to be some repeating of information here. Uh, so sorry about that. And two, I originally gave this presentation in the late spring, and a lot has changed then. And so, especially like as I was readjusting this, lots happened in the past couple of days. And so I have tried to make this relevant, but I won't belabor the point. I will just get into it. Share my screen here. Okay. Usually, when I discuss the military's impact on climate change, I rely on clear, quantifiable information to demonstrate the enormously detrimental impact our commitment to war has on our shared ecosystem. Like this. Here's a slide showing the total carbon emissions of the world's top carbon emitters. We can see that the USA is at number 2, and the Department of Defense itself is at number 54. That means that just our military alone emits almost as much carbon byproducts as the entire settler state of Israel. But this presentation is not about the US military exclusively. It's about Israel's genocidal retaliation against occupied Gaza, and I have found that difficult to quantify. I am going to present numbers accounting for waste and carbon emissions this tragedy has produced and will produce. And those numbers are intended to demonstrate the heinous impact of that this conflict will have and is having on the living terrain of Gaza. Specifically, we're going to look at concrete. Concrete epitomizes the exorbitant polluting effects of war. As rubble, it's burdensome. And prosecuting an invasion requires a lot of it, which is costly to produce and to move. This conflict is also damaging the political environment of this planet. Israel's genocidal retaliation against Gaza is the transformation of war from nation state conflicts fought by opposing armies and into the managed decimation of populations and landscapes. That is to say, there are no more civilians in Gaza. This war has made them extinct. And as war consumes and corrupts more of our environment, our own status as civilians becomes threatened. But we're going to start with those emissions numbers. Military emissions are difficult to track because the accounting they give is opaque and misleading at best, if not completely spurious. Uh, the UN has 3 levels of obligation under which countries account for their fossil fuel emissions. In this accounting, countries designate whether these emissions come from mobile sources like ground, sea, or air vehicles, or stationary sources like building power consumption. However, there is no obligation to distinguish military emissions from civil ones. But this disguises the impact militarization specifically has on the environment. There's no doubt that the massive fleets of air, sea, and land vehicles the military employs have deeply terrible impacts on the state of this planet. But what is occluded by this milquetoast accounting method is the extent to which supply chains, manufacturing of materiel, munitions testing, and the construction and maintenance of outposts and battlefield structures such as trenches, field hospitals, fuel depots, and concrete fortifications contribute to global warming and climate catastrophe. And concrete is a particularly nasty part of military emissions. Gaza is now a site of immense rubble. Israeli airstrikes have decimated buildings, leaving much of Rafah and other metropolitan centers in the occupied territory little more than toppled masses of concrete, hiding scores of bodies, some of which will never be found, as well as numerous other toxic chemicals and dangerous waste products. Concrete can be recycled. It can be broken down and turned into other aggregate materials, but that requires a lot of infrastructure. Unless the rubble is going to be hauled somewhere, which means additional fuel resources are being consumed for transportation, then the machinery needs to be operated at the location of the rubble. This means that there has to be engineering equipment and know-how available to spontaneously establish these kinds of projects, And as you can see from this picture here, that capacity has been taken from Gaza. Outside help could be brought in to facilitate these kinds of projects, but, and this is speculation, which I think is well-founded, um, given the attitude Israel has displayed so far towards allowing aid and reconstruction efforts into Gaza, we should not expect this to manifest anytime soon. The other option would be to landfill this material, and this runs into a similar problem from recycling. It would have to be transported. That transportation will cost a lot of money because there's a lot of rubble. And then it would take up space that could be filled with other waste. There's neither the fuel, nor the material, nor the landfill space in Gaza to support this. So the rubble would have to go somewhere far away from where it currently is. And for all the same reasons as recycling seems unlikely, so does transportation to an outside landfill. But there's one other option which circumvents all of these concerns. It could just be dumped into the ocean. The destiny of much of the rubble from both Libya and Syria was the Mediterranean. So this would follow the established method for post-conflict cleanup in the region. And since other options come with so much higher costs in terms of manpower and treasure, we should at least be willing to entertain the idea that much of the waste we see here in this image and in others to come is headed for the sea or will blight the marine environment there for lifetimes. But there's more than just rubble to worry about. But so far, Israel has mostly been pursuing their war goals through bombing, artillery, and what the US military calls indirect disruption, like the deployment of snipers to maim and assassinate human beings. However, Israel maintains that its goal is to eliminate Hamas completely. And if this conflict is going to develop into more traditional direct occupation or ground combat, which it is developing in that direction, then that will require fortification of controlled positions and the construction of frontline assets to cover troop movements and control movement in the conflict zone. I mean, if Israel plans on conducting a ground operation in Rafah, which is going on, arguably, and they maintain that this is their goal, they're going to pour a lot of concrete. So this slide shows the layout of concrete fortifications erected to support the US imperial occupation of Iraq. This is 5 years into the conflict, and what we're seeing here is about 215 miles of concrete walls dividing the city into manageable zones and protecting fortified positions. The amount of fuel emissions produced in the manufacture and deployment of that concrete 5 years into that conflict is equivalent to operating 43,000 passenger vehicles for 1 year. In this slide, we are already looking at a catastrophe of concrete. All of this was once the backbone of homes and workplaces, schools and hospitals, and is now ruins and waste, the mangled bodies of their former inhabitants festering inside. All of this is likely headed for the sea, and on top of that, in order to continue this genocide, Israel will be building even more of this stuff, excluding the tanks and the aircraft and the drones and all of the generators fueling Israel's retaliation. Concrete alone produced by this conflict is a massive waste. The International Panel on Climate Change, that's the most official group of climate authorities, they said last year that Earth's temperatures are past the point of no return. Right now, we are in the climate catastrophe. The planet is going to get hotter, and weather patterns are going to grow increasingly unpredictable. The Earth cannot sustain this conflict. Scratch that. The Earth is not sustaining this conflict now. We are in the disaster of climate change now. And this concrete rubble harbors asbestos and oil. It's covered in trichloroethylene and white phosphorus from an unrelenting aerial bombing campaign. All of these chemicals are seeping into the soil of Gaza and afflicting its aquifers and rivers, guaranteeing that for decades, if not centuries to come, this land will be blighted and toxic. Unlike the concrete, the effects of that toxicity cannot be quantified. Even if a permanent ceasefire were declared now, the people of Gaza would be returning to a place where all life, the land itself, is contaminated. Like Korea, Vietnam, Ukraine, Iraq, Afghanistan, Libya, Somalia, Ethiopia, and Yemen, Gaza itself is a casualty of new war. These wars are not about securing territory, but punishing, disabling, and removing undesirable populations and ensuring their lands and homes are despoiled so they have nothing to which they may return. Or, if they return, the lingering conflict, the lingering conflict pollutants will continue the project of extermination which was brought against them. I myself fought in the imperialist war that the United States waged against Afghanistan, cost about $2 trillion and resulted in the direct deaths of almost 400,000 people. The Iraq war cost almost 1 trillion and killed almost as many as 500,000 people directly. As a result of those wars, the Iraqi state has been almost completely destabilized, and the Taliban are once again in control of Afghanistan. So much for nation building. Libya is a failed state. It may never recover from the civil war that grips it. Right now, the World Food Program estimates that the worst cases of famine and hunger in the world are all caused by conflict, like in Sudan, in Yemen, and now in Gaza. Ukraine was once a key producer in global food supplies, but this is jeopardized by Russia's war of aggression. Since October 7th, Israel has directly assaulted the Al Ali Arab Hospital, the Indonesian Hospital, the Al Quds Hospital, the Al Amal Hospital, the Turkish Palestinian Friendship Hospital, the Jordan Field Hospital, the Al Auda Hospital, the Sheikh Hamad bin Khalifa Al Thani Hospital, and shortly after I gave this presentation the first time, the Al Shifa Hospital, largest in Gaza City, was destroyed and no longer treats patients. Israel has blocked aid from coming into Gaza, seizing control of the Rafah border with Egypt, and I personally do not put much faith in the sanctity of international law, but for what it's worth, it's completely illegal to take over another country's border as though it was your own. This is a violation of the national sovereignty of both Israel and Gaza. Of both Gaza and Egypt. Israeli invading forces have directly targeted and assassinated people trying to get access to airdropped aid. Since June, Israeli forces have killed about 1,000 people in Gaza. Since June. Israeli forces have directly targeted ambulances, journalists, children, aid workers, mosques, churches, schools, and refugee camps. Israel yesterday announced that returning their citizens to their homes in the north as a new war goal, directly antagonizing Hezbollah. And they continue to claim the complete elimination of Hamas as their war goal. But this is not a war on Hamas or Hezbollah. This is a war on the people of Gaza, their way of life, and the very land itself. The genocidal Israeli retaliation has so thoroughly raised the environment in Gaza that peace cannot grow there, and civilians have gone extinct. There is no front line to this war. Israel is hunting insurgents and terrorists, but they could be anyone, could be anywhere. Everyone in Gaza is a target. All the people of Gaza are being treated as if they are enemy combatants. In the first year of the Iraq invasion, just over 9,000 so-called enemy combatants were killed, and additionally, another 4,000 civilians. That's 13,000 people. Since October 7th, over 30,000 people have been killed in Gaza, a number which has grown a lot since I gave this presentation the first time, 58% of those being women and children. So I repeat, 15,000 women and children, more than all of the deaths in the first year of the Iraq invasion. And that's not even accounting for all of the civilian deaths total. Gaza has become what Crip eco-philosopher Sonara Taylor calls disabled ecology. This is a picture of the contaminant runoff reservoirs on Hughes Air Force Base in Tucson, Arizona. The toxic chemicals stored in these reservoirs leaked into the surrounding aquifer system and caused a mass die-off of plant and animal life in the surrounding, mostly Latinx community, and led to an epidemic of cancer that required millions of dollars spent in reparations and emergency healthcare provisions. The taint which this base spread throughout the waters of Arizona led the EPA to label these rivers and aquifers as impaired. Impairment Taylor notes, is a key conceptual component in the social model of disability, which describes disability as the social and political conditions that turn an impairment into something that hinders the ability to lead a dignified life. Tucson's aquifers are designated impaired because they no longer serve the human community in the way they are expected to. Now, these waters are part of an interspecies, living and non-living systemic exchange of disability. This water no longer reaches the mesquite groves that lined the rivers of this region because they have all been killed. The people of Tucson's south side are being poisoned by the water's toxicity. The cause of this is not natural change in the chemical makeup of this system, but is a direct result of militarized imperialist US policy. This place was made disabled by intentional political decisions. So, Israeli airstrikes have dropped more than 25,000 tons of bombs in Gaza. That is more destructive power than 2 nuclear bombs. The contaminants and heavy metals in those bombs are seeping into Gaza's soil and its already scarce water resources. Healthcare is over in Gaza. There's only triage, and what little of that there is, Israel's genocidal retaliation is maiming people indiscriminately. The land of Gaza is being disabled. It can no longer hold what it once held. The people of Gaza are being disabled, if not outright killed. They are being wounded, traumatized, starved, exposed to filth and disease, and being driven from their homes. Whatever Israel's intention were when this retaliation began, this cost has already been too high. As I have tried to make clear, carbon pollution cost is already astronomical. This comes at a time when the planet's weather is already being driven to new, never before experienced extremes. This conflict is exacerbating a lethal process, which has already been pushed beyond the point of no return. This conflict is harming our shared environment. This conflict has also laid waste to the local environment of Gaza. Gaza is and will remain a place of extraordinary misery, certainly for the rest of my life and likely for generations to come. Ceasefire is long overdue. There must be ceasefire now. There must have been a ceasefire months ago. People are going to continue living in Gaza. Gaza will always be people's homes. In addition to a ceasefire, there must be a transnational effort to recover this land and these people as much as possible to mitigate the hostilities between Palestinian and Israeli nations and to dismantle the military-industrial complexes which dominate international relations in the modern world. Now, when I gave this presentation originally back in the spring, I had a different conclusion. I had handwritten it that day, the day that I was speaking, and I couldn't find it for this presentation, but it's just as well because I want to conclude with a rumination on 2 recent events. And honestly, my attitude towards this conflict has changed. I wasn't hopeful for a ceasefire, but now I'm not sure what could be done as a meaningful step towards peace and justice and reconciliation in this region as Israel and its military continues to ramp up the state and quite frankly change the nature of armed conflict itself. I want to talk about the wretched assassination of true hero and American citizen Aishanur Ezgiegi and the clandestine explosive pager assault that Israel unleashed on Jordanian civilians. Both of these represent a disturbing trend in contemporary militarization, which I cannot help but feel as though the public writ large has yet to grapple with. In both of these tragedies, the Israeli military, with the full and unwavering support of the US state apparatus, unleashed indiscriminate killing power on so-called civilian targets, directly disregarding the sovereignty of other nations, which, again, I repeat, take international law however you want to, but that is supposed to be the foundation of that concept, that nations have sovereignty, that war must be declared. In the first case, an Israeli soldier shot an unarmed American citizen in the head. And in the latter, the Israeli military planned for months an operation which indiscriminately wounded almost, now I hear the number is over 3,000 civilians and killed. This morning, I heard it was 12. The number could be higher. I mean, like, this is the crazy thing that I wrote this last night, and already there was a repeat of this maneuver. I mean, it's impossible to quantify the level of destruction that is coming out of this region, some of whom were children. This is no longer Israel's genocide on Gaza. This is Israel's, and by the extension, the United States, war on the very concept of civility. This is not new. Arguably, modern warfare's penchant for civilian massacre began with the bombing of Guernica by Nazi mercenaries in Spain. But I wish to bring our attention to these two events as a means of interrogating the very meaning of civility as a legitimate means of conceiving of ourselves in this modern age of warfare. And I'm bringing this to a close. Thank you for your patience. So forgive me for getting a little philosophical here, but what would it mean to eliminate Hamas? They are the democratically elected representative body of Gaza, one whose installation Israel supported. I mean that question to ask, who makes up that body of democratic will? Who counts? How can a popular organization be eliminated without killing a populace or Hezbollah? This is an international paramilitary organized along ideological lines with militant discipline and coherency of vision. What does elimination entail? A national military is an extraordinary, dangerous thing. As I have attempted to point out throughout this presentation, they wreck this climate. There is no more destructive and wasteful practice than preparing for and fomenting war. It is killing this planet. Military, in its most abstract sense, is a war on the planet simply by virtue of what militarization requires for sustenance. But so long as there are militaries asserting their power, protecting their nationalist interests, and hoarding power through arms, then we, as unarmed, non-combatant civilians, are at risk. The military hates civilians. Civilians are the clearest target for winning a modern war. And here we see it. Hezbollah cannot be defeated. They are decentralized. They are an idea. But Lebanon can be reduced to rubble. Gaza can be reduced to rubble. The people who intersect with these ideologies, who live in these spaces, can be terrorized and expunged such that there is less operational space for anything, any kind of life. And that is what the Israeli military has made clear is its goal. There can be no kind of life in this region except for militarized Israeli life, because that's the kind that it can control. And that might seem far away for us, but there's going to be disaster here. That's climate change. This country is going to experience emergency. This country is going to experience instability and crisis. We cannot let militaries decide the terms of crisis revolution, be it climatological, ideological, or whatever else. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you, Ian. I really appreciate that. That was